Welcome to another episode of Tell Me More. We are talking about distraction and working through the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. And we hope it's a beneficial conversation for you as you think about your own life and what it means to rebuild. Okay, well, it's time to make a podcast.
Let's do it. Podcast time.
Before we really dig in, our wonderful Kyle Judkins. I don't even know what to call him.
Kyle, do you know him?
To know him is to love him.
He's our AVL manager.
He's a great guy.
He's really great.
But he pointed out that we should promote some of the upcoming events that are happening over the next month.
Believe it
and
or
a half.
not, people listen to our podcast. And this might
I'm still shocked by that, by the way.
I know. Believe it or not, we don't just talk into a room once a week. And because it's hard to know, we always talk about this, what's the best way to communicate with our people? It's always a challenge. And so how do you, the listener, know what's going on around here? And so he showed us a pretty good list of things. So can we start with that?
Well,
can we start with a little,
before we talk about the list,
this
the
show
best way,
brought to you by
the Church Center app.
The Church Center app, a one-stop shop for all your church needs.
If you have not downloaded the new church app, do it. It's called Church Center.
It looks like, so if you're listening, it's got a little steeple, right?
Does it?
Let me look.
No steeple.
Oh, hey everybody, I lied. Yes, it does. Well, it's a church. It doesn't have a steeple. Yeah, but it's a green, blue, and dark blue little church.
Yeah. But all you have to do to log in is actually just put in your phone number.
It's pretty easy.
It's so easy.
It's pretty user-friendly.
It's great.
But if you have that, then you could open it up, and it would show, I'm opening mine. It would show you
calendar.
Mm-hmm. All good.
Hello, Katie. Oh, how wonderful. Thank you. You got a calendar. You got ministries. You got an easy way to give.
It's all there.
It's all there. Mm-hmm. And so some things coming up that we would, like, if you were to open this, you would see a couple of really exciting things that are coming up this weekend and beyond. Mm-hmm. They are just a few things, and we won't have to go through all of them. I will confess, Young Family Picnic Night, I didn't know about, and I'm a young family. It's not their fault for not communicating it. I just kind of stay in my lane, and I'm sure they send something home in a diaper bag. But if you are a part of a young family, this sounds really great. I think Ryan and I will try to be there. Young Family Picnic Night this Friday night at Stovall Park. Hot dogs provided, 5:30 to 7:30.
I think they're also having Pokios. Rumor has it.
They are.
Pokios. What's a Pokio?
It's cookies and ice cream.
Well, the Hodges will be there.
What's not to love?
It's a little food truck, right? They usually bring it out. Yeah, it's really good.
If you're not a young family, when you're like, what's for me? Well, if you have youth in the house, then they have Noche de Nacho, which is Sunday night, and they have Dwell and Man Camp, which are retreats for the women and the men of the youth. Those are both going to be at Riverbend the weekend before Thanksgiving. Yep. So that's going to come quick. Sign up for that.
Registrations, I think, will be available through the calendar button in Church Center. So you can actually...
You're telling me, I think you're right. You're telling me that if you can find it on fbca.org/events or the calendar in the planning center, that's a one-stop shop to both know about it and register for it.
Yep. So you can actually, I think, register in the Church Center app.
And if you're like, I'm not part of a young family or a median family, well, we've got Magnificent Mondays, which is a hymn sing for our older adults, mostly our retirees, October 21st. And one thing I didn't mention back to preschool ministry, they're having Touch a Truck on October 19, which is where they get a bunch of cool trucks. That's preschool ministry. Mm-hmm. And we'll be there too. So it's a little bit of an appearance calendar for us, turns out. Nobody cares.
If you'd like to see the triplets, you know where to find them.
Touch a truck.
That's right.
And maybe come help.
Oh.
And if you have a cool car.
That's true.
They're always looking for something
That's true.
fun and exciting. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff you could be a part of. And I know we ran through it quickly, so if you can't find it, go to the Church app, Church Center app, or fbca.org/events.
Both great places.
With that said.
And this podcast is actually sponsored by all of that. I mean, by First Baptist Arlington. So.
Yeah. We don't exist in a silo.
That's right.
We're part of our church.
We are. Okay, well, we also had worship yesterday where you preached 2 times.
We did.
As you normally do.
That's right.
What'd you talk about?
What would you say you talked about?
I got so distracted I can't remember. Distractions.
That little bit on your phone, it went over well.
Was that okay?
It went over well in both services.
It was a good comedic bit.
Yeah.
Well, I was trying to do
point home.
Yeah, a little alliteration. So actually, when I sent the outline, Jen wrote me back and said, Doctor, sometimes I will misspell something or I'll have something
she
off, and she
checks
always catches it. So she wrote me and said, Dr. Wiles, you have phone spelled F-O-N-E. Is this what you intended?
I love it.
And I said, just leave it. I'll explain it later. And she was like, okay, thank you. And, but I had to, when you're a preacher, you got to alliterate stuff.
I would like to point out with my English degree that alliteration is phonetic. It's not based on the spelling, so it still would have been alliteration if it was PH.
Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, D-Dub was wrong.
Yeah,
just like I found it.
One of our
it was more cutesy.
One of our Truett grads, not you, but you could have done it. Wanted to make sure that I understood how to pronounce these Hebrew month names.
It wasn't me either.
Yeah.
Just
it wasn't me.
Anyway, everyone already knew that, but just to be clear.
But yeah, we talked about distractions.
So there's only 2 other Truett grads on staff for those who are listening.
Well, there are people in the church.
Oh,
that are
you're right.
trying
Oh,
to-
yeah.
Yes,
You're right. You're right about that.
Truett grads.
They're everywhere
Don't give
now.
us a
They
bad
have
name.
taken over my church. Is what's happening.
Aren't you blessed?
But
May our tribe increase.
but yeah,
I'm not
it was
opposed.
interesting. When I was planning out this series,
You're saying it was my husband.
no, it wasn't.
I'm just
trying-
kidding. It's not a Hebrew scholar. I'm messing. Okay,
You're
keep
narrowing
going.
it down.
Keep going.
You're narrowing
Jason
it down.
Berryhill. Oh, no. Probably Cliff Lusk.
It wasn't
Okay,
Jason,
keep
but you're
going.
narrowing it down.
Okay.
You're getting close.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Cliff Lusk. It was Cliff, wasn't it?
And okay, we're going to keep going here.
Speaking of distractions,
That's right. But no, it's interesting. When you're dating Nehemiah, trying to figure out exactly when did all this occur. Ezra and Nehemiah together, actually. There's a little bit of debate about just how that material is all put together, because even in Ezra, you go back and forth a little bit, chronologically. And so there are some questions just about the exact timing. But what's interesting is there is enough information, though, that we actually have it pretty close to even the actual months that things happened. And so, Elul, it's actually the month for September. It's the word for September. And there are other countries in the world that even use that phraseology, like there are certain countries in the world that actually means September. But there are some scholars who believe that what's recorded in Nehemiah took place in October. That's why I mentioned it Sunday, October 2nd, that would have been last week, kind of connected it to our time. But anyway, trying to figure out when all this occurred is fascinating. And it's also pretty cool that Nehemiah gives us such a detailed account of it all. I think that's why it's so interesting. You've pointed that out, Katy.
Yeah, it's just great reading.
He said this, we said that. He sent this letter, I wrote this back.
Even yesterday, they sent the letter. It wasn't sealed.
Yeah.
And you're like, everybody's been reading it.
That's
It's
right.
just such a
Which means
honest,
the guy could read it all on the way there. Anywhere he stopped, he's got an open letter.
Yeah.
So he's just stopping along the way, reading this letter, saying, guess what's happening? Nehemiah's going to become the next king. And they already had a bad reputation for rebelling. And so you have people thinking, well, wait a minute, Jerusalem's about to get a wall.
So maybe somebody should have sealed that letter.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
So they did it on purpose,
No, I know.
So Nehemiah is having to respond to all that. But regardless, as I was planning this series, one of the attractive things about Ezra and Nehemiah to me is it does have, I think, really good ideas and conversation starters and principles to learn if you're a leader, because you do watch these men, Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah, they demonstrate some pretty incredible leadership actions. That's why some people read those 2 books through that lens. You hear that a lot, in terms of teaching these books. So I was thinking a lot about that. However, as y'all know, I landed on more of the rebuilding lens. And so I was out walking one morning. I had read Ezra and Nehemiah, and I had listened to a couple of different teachers on both books, more theologically bent than anything, actually. But I was out walking one morning and just going through the story, and I kept finding myself just thinking through different things that were a part of the rebuilding process. And so that's how I landed kind of on each one of these steps, if you will. And so I was debating one morning with myself over the difference between obstacles and distractions. And so so I had about a 30-minute argument with myself while I was out walking, saying, well, I'm not even going to talk about distractions because I'm really going to cover that under obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would go back and forth and go, well, obstacles are things you actually have to deal with. They're in your way. You have got to address it. Distractions you can just dismiss.
You can even see obstacles coming.
They really are different, you know, but they're connected. And there's a little bit of...
But to give them 2 separate sermons is significant.
Which is what I ended up deciding to do. Just say, well, actually, I want to talk about distractions because I think it's a little different, a little nuanced from just an obstacle.
Well, and kind of like Luke said in our prep, sorry, the mic wasn't on yet. When we think about distractions in our day and age, we are very I'm running from what Luke said. Luke talked about our phones and how we might want to talk about that in here because, sorry, I skipped a lot of steps in my mind, because we are a very distracted generation.
We are.
And not that we're the same generation, but
we're a distracted
culture,
contemporary society.
There, thank you. Yeah, what's the umbrella for all of us? Yeah. We are incredibly distracted, and I mean, there's studies about that. We talk about the algorithm as the enemy, and it's true. But even our attention spans are just the younger you are, the worse it is because you've been trained to process information in 15 to 30 second chunks. Where when I was growing up, it was much slower, and now it's just.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, just, like I said Sunday morning, Eric Bruntmeyer just kind of made that comment to me about what's happening in the lunchroom at Hardin Simmons. They're just noticing more and more kids are just having conversations. They actually put their phones up in their backpacks and not because anybody's told them to. It just seems to be something they're doing.
Do you think there's sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like a pendulum swing going on?
I wonder.
We were all...
There are more school districts now moving to phone-free high schools or just phone-free schools.
Like we're realizing how detrimental this really is. The pendulum's starting to swing.
There's like a really prominent book right now. I haven't read it, but it's definitely made the circles. But it's called The Anxious Generation. I think it's by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah, I've heard of it, and I haven't read it.
If I'm saying his name wrong, I'm sorry.
It's okay. He's an interesting writer, though.
Yeah, but there's actually a lot. I think you're seeing a counter movement. Both from parents and even Gen Z is actually many people in Gen Z are reverting to dumb phones, as it were, just because they've realized the impact that a smartphone has had on their mental health. So
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're seeing people who are starting to live in 2 worlds at once. You're seeing people who just keep digging further in, and you're seeing people who are making an exit and navigating what that means for life.
How do you...
But I think the whole concept of distraction is an interesting one to me because, you have to decide whether something is actually a distraction or not.
Yeah. So we were talking about this before the podcast. Is it central to
what you should be doing, or is it actually a distraction?
So I brought this question up before the podcast. How do you know if it's a distraction or if it's actually the work? Right. And so my kind of case in point was yesterday morning, I'm listening to the sermon, which is both what I do for my own formation, but also for my job because I come in here on Monday morning.
They go together.
I've got to have questions and I've got to be ready to have a conversation that's going to be publicly broadcasted.
What did he mean by that? Tell me more about that.
Tell me more. And as I'm sitting, my family and I, we sit in the very back on the chairs on the back wall because I almost never make it into worship at 11. I think I make it in at like 11:30 if I'm lucky. And I'm sitting there and our now 5-year-old is coloring on the floor. She sings with us. We have her stand while we're singing, but then that time has ended. So she's on the floor, she's coloring, and she's got coloring pages from Sunday school all around her, and she's basically spinning in a circle on the floor, moving from coloring page to coloring page. She's dropping crayons. They're rolling everywhere. And so as I'm trying to take notes on this sermon about distraction, I'm incredibly distracted by my 5-year-old who needs my help opening packages of crayons and
but it's your kid
picking up things. And so,
you don't want to
as you're talking about distraction, what really is a distraction?
I was about to say, was the sermon a distraction to you? You were trying to parent your child,
And but I think that's a question a lot of people have. And so you provided this example about corporate life, but I think about stay-at-home parents or teachers or people who work in maybe not task-oriented professions, but human services where maybe it feels like most of your day is actually just the endless distractions of the needs of other people. So how do you...
And even in the life of Jesus, you see him sometimes totally derail what we thought he was going to do with the day to pay attention to someone who's come into his midst. Right. I could think of a couple of those stories. And sometimes it seems like he's on a mission and he's not going to stop to entertain the potential distraction. So what's the discernment there?
And I think you deal with that
Teach us everything. Teach us everything, Dr.
Deal
Miles.
with that at church, because right now, I think, is a great example of you having to discern that as a leader. So we're in the middle of a very contentious election cycle. Okay,
What?
and the countdown is on. All right, here it's October.
Which I saw something that if you see someone on Facebook whose posts anger you, you can hit snooze on their posts and you won't see them again until the election's over.
because it's snooze for 30 days. And now we're within the window.
Yeah.
You're within the window
Life
to
hack.
snooze your loved ones for 30 days
Yeah.
and maintain your love for them.
I love that.
Well, so one of the
We're just here to help.
questions
We're just here to help.
One of the questions that you deal with if you're a pastor, do you how directly do you address things like this when it's the conversation in the public domain right now nonstop, and how do you try to speak into it prophetically? Do you just ignore it? Is it a distraction, or is it really a central thing that the church ought to be talking about? And so you have people are across the spectrum on that, as you might imagine, and kind of my take on it would be that the church exists for a unique reason, that nothing else in society fills that place. If the church doesn't fill this space with what it's supposed to bring, there is nothing. Other things can take up space, but nobody really brings that very phenomenon to a community or to a conversation. And so I think that as normal, y'all wouldn't be surprised by this, I believe there's a ditch on both sides of the road. On the one hand, you can turn into the kind of church that all you do is engage in political conversation, and it really becomes the thrust of who your church is, and you become identified with a certain ideology. That does happen. Or you can just totally ignore everything. I think I've told y'all this story before, that one of my professors in seminary was in Dallas when President Kennedy was assassinated, and he went to church the following Sunday morning, and it wasn't mentioned from the pulpit in Dallas at this particular church. And he just said to us as burgeoning pastors and leaders, use common sense. If something of this magnitude occurs, don't think you're tied to your series or the lexicon that you can't step aside and go, oh my goodness, this massive things occurred. So I think that is important, that we do that. But at the same time, if you get to the point to where all you do is give attention to all things political, if that just becomes the kind of the rallying cry of your church, well, then to me, you've lost your way. You've bought into a distraction, I would say. I think helping people to learn how to think for themselves and reason for themselves and understand how they can best apply their Christian hopes and their theology into every single arena is our job. And so I don't think I always have to be so specific to show you what to do. I'm trying to spend more time helping you figure out how to do it, because you've got to decide what to do, if that makes sense. And so I'm not going to cave in to this this distraction, in my opinion, that I've got to address every single political issue that's on the horizon. I would rather raise up really strong, good, healthy, flourishing believers who can use the right lenses. They can focus all this through and then make the decisions for themselves. Now, if y'all know me well enough to know that sometimes I will use humor to kind of address that. I started to do that Sunday morning in both services. I decided against it. I didn't say anything about it in the first service. I said something.
Is that when you kind of walked up to it and said,
in the
nah,
second
never
service,
mind?
I said something about it. I'm not going to do it.
You said you wouldn't like me for it, which I thought was funny, because you say things that people don't like because it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't shy from those,
Right.
but you got to do those in the right way at the right time.
So
right.
what I had planned to say in both services.
Ooh, tell us more.
Well, I was just going to talk about how easily
I did have a question about
how
this.
easily distracted we are,
ask.
because we're just so easily led away. And I think if you want to see how that works, you can watch the political debates right now, because what will happen is that just pick any of them, because they all do it. The person posing the question can ask a question, and if you're sitting there watching it, and then the candidate never answers that question, the candidate just starts spouting something else, and you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly right, and then next thing you know, you're going to go down a rabbit hole with whatever the candidate has brought up. But you're not even thinking about the real question itself because we're just so easily distracted, And I watched it happen in both debates, the ones that happened for the president and ones that happened for the vice president. And at one point I even paused it and made that comment to Cindy. I said, isn't it funny that we've emotionally taken ourselves to the distraction that the candidate led us into
instead of the question,
and instead of the real question, which is actually something that we should actually be concerned about, And but we're just so easily distracted. That's just how we are right now. It's just take us this. Oh yeah, you're exactly right. When I'm thinking, well, no, that we may be right, but what about this? What about the question about the economy? That was the actual question, but neither one of them talked about it. But they've got us all emotional now because we're so easily distracted. Yeah. And I think they know that.
Well, and we need to. I mean, I'll stay off my soapbox. I'll do like you did on Sunday. Another time, another place.
But even as you think about this, and this ties into the phone piece. If you think about from a psychological or neurological research perspective, there's actually a lot of great research to basically say, here's how human brains work. You're not as smart as you think you are. That includes me. I'm not as smart as I think I am. Your emotional processing in your brain, and I'm trying to remember the exact number, it's either 10 or 100, but it happens at least 10 times faster than the logical part of your brain. So before you actually are even capable of forming that logical kind of linguistic thought, your brain has accelerated into emotional reaction that then moves throughout the rest of your body. So we may think of ourselves as really rational people, but your emotions are actually flying at 10 times or 100 times, I can't remember, I'm sorry, the speed of your rational thought. And so, we get led astray really easily, really quickly.
Exactly. And then you forget even where you even started and what was even going on in the first place. But as I was praying through this series, what I was hoping to accomplish in general is I'm wanting to encourage and assist and come alongside people who truly are rebuilding their lives right now, or maybe they're rebuilding their company, or they're a part of just rebuilding anything. Or it's funny, we have there's a young man who works at the golf course who comes to our church, but he's not always able to be there because he has to be at work. And so yesterday afternoon, I decided to go to the driving range, golf course yesterday, and so I was walking up to the driving range, and he stopped me. And he said, "Hey, Dr. Wiles, how you doing?" I said, "Good." And he said, "Hey, man, it's a good sermon today." And, he said, "I'm trying not to be distracted." Well, he's 20 years old, and I started laughing. I said, "Well, here's what I know about you. You're not rebuilding anything." And he started laughing. He said, "Well, I'm 20. I said, "No, exactly." I said, "You're building." And then he just made the comment "But I'm learning about building. I'm thinking about all this." So, and I thought, man, that made me feel really good to think a 20-year-old young man stopped me when just walking up to hit golf balls to let me know that this is intersecting his life right now as he's contemplating his future and what he's doing. He's taking these principles and thinking about them.
It's been a very practical series.
And that's what I've been hopeful for. I've tried to use the voice of a shepherd. We've talked about the different voices, and I've been trying to do that in this series to be a much more practical kind of approach to things, because I've tried to vary this year's sermon styles, if you will, to give a fuller, more fully throated approach to all of this. And I'm going to be very intentional about that in the future. I just spent the day at Hardin Simmons with all these pastors, and they let me pick my topic. It was about preaching, but they said, "Could you just tell us what aspect of preaching do you want to cover?" And so I chose pastoring your church from the pulpit. Now, it's a little misleading because we all know you have to be engaged with people to pastor them and shepherd them and be in their lives.
But I know that you also see preaching as an act of pastoral care.
I do. I really believe that. Yeah. And I believe it's a way to lead people. And so I spent some time with a lot of these church leaders, pastors, almost all of them were, talking through how do you do that in your preaching? What does that really mean? And how do you need to think about it? And so we talked about different categories of sermons, because some sermons are more theologically bent. You're thinking, okay, I'm trying to teach our people to think theologically, to reflect theologically, to understand maybe complex Christian doctrine. Some sermons are more spiritual life focused. They're helping you understand maybe spiritual disciplines or what it means to be formed spiritually. Some sermons are vision casting. You're looking at the church and saying, okay, we're going to have to, blessing the generations was an example of that, of us looking toward the future for our church. And some sermons are more pragmatic, addressing life issues. And so we talked about how you've got this breadth of material with all these different genres of literature in the Scripture. You've got this beautiful set of truth, if you will, that the Lord has given us. And so as you engage it in your preaching, you need to engage it all. You need to find your way in all of it. And then I would encourage you to think through the categories of sermons, however you would choose to put them. So this is how I would do it. Then you have to think about the liturgy of your church, kind of the seasonal rhythm of your church. And every church is different. I've been in numerous churches as a pastor. They all have a different vibe, a different feel. They just have different personalities. I'll never forget when I was interviewing with a church search committee, and they had asked me a whole bunch of questions. And I'd been thinking about what I wanted to ask them, and they finally said, well, do you have a question for us? I said, yeah. I said, if you were to describe your church as a person, how would you describe your church as a person? And it was interesting to listen to them. They kind of went back and forth, and finally, this is where they landed. They said, we would say our church is like middle-aged, balding accountant who's had a pretty good career, and now he's looking at everything and asking the question, so is this really all I intended to do with my life? It's reasonable. He's thoughtful, not given to a lot of emotion, but is really wondering what's next. Well, after I went there to pastor that church, that was a pretty good description of that church, And so I just challenge these pastors to think about the church they're pastoring and just say, okay, you look at your church. How would you describe your church? And then look at the seasonal rhythms of your church and then build a preaching plan that engages that seasonal rhythm or changes it, if it needs to be adjusted, shape it. And then bring these different categories of sermons and take the genres of literature seriously and take your own voice seriously. You've got to find your own voice. And I love to illustrate that with two golfers. Is how I typically do that when I'm teaching preaching. There's a professional golfer named John Daly his typical phrase is known. They call him grip it and rip it. He goes up to the ball. He's usually smoking a cigarette. He's got a can of beer in his hand, and he's barefooted, and he puts the beer down. And when he swings, he goes way over. I mean, the head of the club is almost back pointing to the ground, which you just don't do. I mean, nobody does that because
John Daly does it.
Yeah, you just can't do that and get back to the ball. Or Jim Furyk, who's about this big around, and
he's holding up his finger.
He's tiny, skinny. And he's very reasoned, very precise, very measured guy. And when you get to the top of his backswing, the head of his club is pointing straight up into the sky. In other words, he does not go way over. And he's a right-handed golfer, and he has what's called the chicken wing, which you don't want in golf. Baseball, you do. In baseball, you want your elbow up so that you can explode through the ball. But in golf, you keep that elbow tucked. Jim Furyk has the club pointing straight into the sky. His right elbow is up. Any golf professional who's teaching a golf swing would say, here is a great example of what not to do. Do not do this. Unless you're Jim Furyk and you want to win the U.S. Open and captain the Ryder Cup team. He just captained the U.S. President's team and President's Cup team, just won it. He's won $1 gazillion. He looks completely different than John Daly. John Daly's won PGA Championship, British Open, and has won $1 gazillion. My point being, you got to find your voice. You got to figure out what is the best you, and then preach with that. And so that's what I've tried to do. And so when I was thinking about this series, it felt like it was time for a pragmatic kind of almost a suggestion of how to kind of series. And so that's how this arose in this kind of in the seasonal journey that we've been on. And Nehemiah and Ezra, that text to me lends itself to that very thing. Because to me, there's just a lot of practical how-to stuff in it, So I'm concerned about the people in my church who are digging out of a divorce, or they're trying to put their marriage back together, or they're trying to figure out, what do I do now that this has happened to me? My company has changed, and now I've got this new job, or I've transferred, or my life circumstances have changed, or even kind of what you described, Luke, in your family. You think about a spouse has died. I'm now retired. I've got kids that are living in different places. So what do I do with that? And I'm not in the era where I was figuring out what to do with my life and what job I wanted, and you know what I mean. That's not, and not to throw your mother-in-law out on it, but I'm saying that's where your mother-in-law is. She's in a very different place in life. Well, okay, it's something in front of you now. I think about me and Cindy, as we're looking at the future that we have. We look at Restore Hope and where we see Restore Hope today. And we've been asking the question, okay, we've done this. We've helped build to this point. Now what? It feels to us like we're entering into another season. And so we're asking ourselves those very questions. So this series has been one that has been practical for me, not just for the church, because I've been thinking through, okay, what's the next leg of the journey look like for me? So I've been praying, asking God for it.
Well, and you've teased some things about the life of our church, which we talked about in here some.
And doing an honest assessment, an honest evaluation of where things are. And so I'm hopeful that it's been an encouraging thing, but I know how easily distracted we are. So that's why I decided to go ahead and pull distraction
and do a
out
full
of
sermon.
obstacle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I just think that's where we are, and I think people identify with it because they know they can get detoured. And I think they also watch other people do it, and it can be very frustrating because you're watching other people thinking, you shouldn't even be dealing with that right now. You're so distracted in your life right now, and I've got a couple people in my life that's how I feel, and I'm trying to figure out how can I be of assistance to get them back up on the pavement, a little bit, and get out of the ditch or out of the little side alley that they've found themselves in somehow.
So for those who have ears to hear,
Yeah.
This sermon's for you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so think about, we're going to transition into next week. Well, as a believer, what's supposed to undergird all of this for me, I believe, is God's revealed truth. And so that's what I love about the story of Nehemiah and Ezra. They get the wall rebuilt. You've got the temple rebuilt. But the people still don't seem yet to understand the rhythm of life that's been given to them by the Lord and the authority that's been handed to them through the Scripture. And so they have a time where they actually gather around the Scripture and they listen to it to be taught to them, and they have this incredible reaction to it. Well, that's what we're going to do next Sunday, to remind everybody we've got to be grounded in truth. We can't just rebuild willy-nilly, do whatever we think is right. In the book of Judges, everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and that ended up to be a disaster.
Not a great plan.
Yeah. So the authority of the Scripture, the revealed truth of God.
So that's a teaser for this Sunday.
Where we're headed. And then the result of all of that, once all this culminates in your life, there's incredible joy and peace. And that's where we'll be the next Sunday. That's what we're aiming toward, is seeing the joy and the beauty of this life that God's given us. And so yeah. And then we'll transition to missions, then we'll transition to Advent, and then we'll turn the page and we'll begin a 3-year journey.
All on flourishing.
That's right, and start January 25, and we're going to engage in a 3-year journey, learning more about human flourishing, and so it all fits together for me, naturally, because I'm I'm in the throes of helping
you put it together,
plan it all out.
But
I'm excited about it. I really am, and I'm hopeful. And I think I sense in our church kind of a sense of renewal among our people, as I'm watching them, that many of them have re-engaged in some areas at church. And I just sense that in the body right now. And that's a really good, positive thing. And it's attractive because other people get drawn to that. And that's exactly what's been happening to us.
Good.
Friends are beginning to visit with friends, and folks are inviting their friends, and that's the kind of thing that happens in a community, in a church. So yeah, I'm very encouraged by it all, and I don't want us to get distracted. And so that's one of the things we'll be talking about as a staff, because again, it's so easy, and it's not just politics; it's issues. You can kind of become a 1 or 2 issue church, and to me that just doesn't feel like you're giving the full, you're giving your full attention to the full revelation of God. the early church, they didn't get distracted to me by trying to prove certain things. They just tried to be faithful to the way, as they called it.
Yeah.
And learning how to be faithful to the way just ended up bleeding over into a lot of other things, but they never lost their way.
Each of them had their own personality.
Yeah.
Each church.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Acts.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like a one-issue church.
That's
No.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the answer too to the how do you discern if it's a distraction or if it's actually the work you're called to, if it's an opportunity. And it's people probably aren't distractions. I think if people are coming to you, my child is not a distraction.
Right. Yeah, people generally would not be distractions. I would agree with that, Luke.
Well, the timing could be, though.
Yeah.
The timing may be, but I think when you envision yourself in your workplace, or maybe you're a stay-at-home parent, the people you're with are the people God has placed you among. And so if they're coming to you with needs, those are opportunities to pray with them, to start conversations about Jesus, to parent well and effectively. I'm sorry I chose my child over listening with full rapt attention. I'm not sorry.
No.
That's what I'm called to.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the only season in life where your child will be this age,
Right.
and you will engage on that level. One of these days, your child will be sitting with the youth and will not even know where you are. And to be honest with you, may not care at that season in their life where you are. And
So
then,
don't miss it.
Right.
Family
Don't miss
picnic
it.
Friday night.
It's just one of those things.
It
you
is.
know?
And
I mean,
so-
I've noticed, Sunday morning, Cindy's out of town. She's in Africa. And so Ada wanted to be at Jam Sunday. And, our daughter has been dealing with cancer. There's a whole lot there. And so Ada wanted to know, will you come by and pick me up and, bring me to church with you, Poppy? And I said, well, Ada,
Pretty early.
I have to be here early. And, that means you will be here through 2 different worship services. And she said, that's okay, Poppy. I want to come. So I went and picked her up early Sunday morning, and she was dressed up in her beautiful dress and ready to go, had her little backpack packed. And so we got here that morning, and I said, okay, I'm going to trust you this morning. You're a mature little girl, and you know your way around this church, and I'm going to have to be in worship at 8:30, and I know you're not going to come to that service. Well, she had her iPad. I gave her some money. She said, I'm going to go down to the cafe and get some breakfast, and I'm going to read some on my iPad, and then I'm going to go to Sunday school, and then I'll meet you for the 11 o'clock worship service, and then I'll go to Jam. And I was like, okay, she's 10, and guess what? She did every bit of that.
Yeah.
And I thought, my goodness.
Wasn't that long ago, though.
Girls, man.
Right?
Yeah, there was a
That you held
time
her.
when she was 3 years old, or 4 years old, and we were doing exactly what you were talking about, Luke, or Cindy was.
Yeah. No way you put money in her hand and send her to the cafe with an iPad.
And then,
right.
And then there you go.
Yeah.
And then we get in the car to go home after Jam. And she says, Poppy, I had a really good day today at church. I really like getting there early. Would you pick me up next Sunday morning on your way to the 8:30 service? I know Mimi's still going to be in Africa. And I said, well, Ada, it makes for a long day for you. She said, it's okay. I kind of enjoyed it. She said, I kind of had some quiet time in the cafe. I enjoyed my breakfast there. And I thought, okay. Well, that's not a distraction for me.
Right.
But the point is, this is a season of life that one day is not going to be there anymore.
Right.
And so I think that people are always important. But I think that what I was trying to communicate Sunday morning is the other things that come in your path when you're rebuilding. I'm also hoping to encourage folks not to be surprised by them. Don't be surprised that you're a little bit afraid. Don't be surprised that you're going to fail sometimes. Don't be surprised that your faith is going to be challenged. Are you going to doubt yourself sometimes? Can you even do this? Is God really in this? We all experience those times, I think. And the frustration, that's why I wanted to refer to what Jesus went through.
Yeah.
I do believe Jesus got
Jesus.
frustrated as a person. I do. I think, I feel it in his voice. I've been with you this long. You couldn't pray with me for 1 hour. I mean, after all that I've spent, all that you've been walking with the Son of God. We've walked on water. We've fed 5,000 people. We've raised people from the dead. And I ask you to pray, and you're going to fall asleep. I mean, seriously.
I think there's a whole podcast, probably series of podcasts on just the humanity of Jesus. Because it's so interesting to me. Because you get right up to that line of sinning is what I'm trying to articulate. Jesus never sinned. We know that. That's just a tenet of our faith.
That's right.
So but when I feel that I get frustrated with people, I think it does go into sin. So like,
where's the line? How do I not cross it?
And sometimes I don't like holding up Jesus as angry or frustrated because I can't accomplish that without thinking ill of my neighbor.
Be angry and do not sin, the Bible says.
Yeah. So I guess it's possible.
I haven't done that yet.
But I'm not sure I've done it. And I think that's when you see Jesus as a frustrated person, somehow we believe and see that Jesus gets frustrated but doesn't sin.
That's right.
So it doesn't turn into contempt for his neighbor or his disciples.
Exactly.
There's some balance there where he can get frustrated with them and still have like ultimate love.
You got it. Because he's awesome.
And this is, and that's, I know, I joked with Dr. Wiles and Luke before we started the podcast, like, do I want to talk about Simon Peter or Jesus just to like hop into the New Testament again? Because not that I miss Jesus. Yeah. It's everywhere. Jesus is everywhere in all of this. But he is just such a wonderful person.
That's right.
And we can go there or not. We're kind of hitting toward the end.
But we'll talk more about
the story of Simon Peter.
It's an incredible story.
It's worth being
Peter next month.
Let's do it.
We will.
I'd like that. Yeah. And I am joking. I don't miss Jesus. Yeah. Jesus is in all this.
Of course.
But I do like thinking about the humanity of Jesus. And I think it helps us learn how to be fully human ourselves. And so it's a fun conversation.
And we're unlike the disciples who were very comfortable with his humanity, less comfortable with his divinity. We're very comfortable with his divinity and less comfortable with his humanity. It's just interesting what time has done to us. They were very comfortable with him as a human.
Yeah.
I mean, they walked together, ate together, slept, they went to bed at night. They watched him get tired. So
I know. What's that like, and how do we? Fosdick, who I know, Fosdick's very liberal or whatever,
liberal, but he's insightful.
But he has a book called The Manhood of the Master, and it's helpful. It was helpful for me at that time in my life. I probably read it 20 years ago, 15 years ago, just to think about. Maybe that's because I was raised in America in the 90s and early aughts, but to think about the manhood of Jesus as he had,
absolutely,
just who he is and how I can be like that because I'm human, and he was like me, but better, I think it can be really helpful. So,
I read Fosdick, he's incredibly liberal. He and I disagree on so much, but he's one of the most insightful liberals that I've ever read.
Yeah, I do. I mean,
it's just proof that you can read people who you disagree with, listen to voices you disagree with, and actually learn, but also not become them.
And that is what I didn't say earlier, because it's a rant that I have. We have to still be critical thinkers.
That's right.
And that's a whole thing. But I do worry that we, in all of the ways, are less and less just critical thinkers, and with discernment and the ability to reason, even though that's like a great attribute of God that we have. And you have to just think critically. So read whatever you want. I mean, within reason. It's helpful and edifying. And if you disagree, think about it. Talk about it with us. I don't know what I think about this. That's okay. We don't have to.
And just because you disagree doesn't mean the other person's evil.
And there are things that,
Amen.
Even theologically, there are people. Sorry, I ran right over that. That was a really good statement. Go back. My mind didn't catch up. Whatever
just
my synapses that you
disagree doesn't mean that person's evil.
That's right.
So to villainize your people you disagree with.
Yeah, don't do it.
We can do better than that. We can, and I think we should, and particularly in this era, that with the church needing to redeem itself a little bit in society, we can have that posture. It's really good.
Awesome.
So, okay, I've got lots to say, but some other time.
We'll have a podcast next week, so.
Yeah, listen to my personal podcast, which is a phone call with me. I'll tell you everything.
And there you have it.
There you have it.
Yeah, call me if you want more. Okay, see y'all.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Tell Me More podcast today. You can subscribe to this podcast on your app of choice, or you can visit us at fbca.org to find out more information about the podcast and our church. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.